Hi, everyone, and welcome to BareLead, where we strip down leadership to its raw, unfiltered, unabashed truths. I'm Pooja, and today we're diving into bold decisions, vulnerability, and what modern leadership looks like for women today. Today, we're also diving into an underrated and underexplored topic of discipline in leadership because it's mostly assumed. My guest today is Vicky, and I'm super excited for you to hear her story and her perspective on this topic. So, thank you so much, Vicky, for being here. It's great that we can finally connect.
Yeah, thank you, Pooja. Thank you for the invite. Thank you for setting up with some really insightful questions. I'm really looking forward to having this discussion.
Wonderful. So, it would be also amazing if you could give the listeners a little bit of a background about yourself and maybe start by sharing a little bit about how you arrived at leadership in your own field.
Yes, I'd love to. Thank you for that. So I sum my background up with I'd like to be able to compress it into 3 decades. So I've been around for long enough to have lived a number of experiences, but that's been over 3 decades. 3 decades spent across three really key verticals, as you would say, but then with this opportunity to explore a whole host of other verticals or businesses. Yes, business sectors. That's the word I was looking for.
Okay.
Um, so yeah, I began my career in healthcare, then took a trip into the world of sporting goods when I moved from the UK to move across to the Netherlands and work for Nike, and then into the world of education, from education management through to EdTech, education online platforms, and then building my own business, which was in leadership development.
Hmm.
Um, and that kind of, I guess, takes me into how I came across leadership. But I guess also the context, having been in a lot of large organizations over the course of my career, I only realize now that gave me a real opportunity to see, I guess, some great leadership. And as I moved through my career and moved into organizations of different sizes, different maturity levels, that gives you the opportunity to see different perspectives of leadership, see the way businesses are led differently and are managed differently.
Yeah.
And I guess, is it a question of do resources allow leaders to have more headroom, more space to think? That's still to me a really interesting question. So back
Mhm.
to the second part of your question, how did I first come across leadership? A whole mix of things. So from the various different roles I've been in over my career, I've always seen leadership as at all levels, and I still believe that, very
Yeah.
firmly believe it. And the leadership focus is not just for exec levels or the C-suite. We all have that ability to be a leader, but of course, we all have to work on muscle, we have to build our capabilities, and also have that right mindset.
Yeah.
Um, so my experiences have been both from a role specific perspective. They've been from the perspective of having great leaders that I aspire to and that are true role models that demonstrate what true leadership really is.
Hmm.
Um, and then also actively burying myself into creating solutions that allow people to build the skill, muscle, mindset, and the right behaviors
Yeah.
of what great leadership looks like. I avoid saying mastery because I think it's a lifelong learning,
Yeah.
and I think that learning is never done.
Absolutely. And I think you hit the nail on the head where you said that, you all once alluded to the fact that leadership is a muscle, not a title, and it does exist at all levels. So thank you for sharing your journey. So many sectors that you've explored and also a pretty solid history of, what got you where you are. And 3 decades is a long time, right? So how do you stay consistent when motivation fades? Because I've rarely come across somebody who has a consistent level of motivation. It goes through its ebbs and flows. So, what's your way of staying consistent through those?
I think, well, I know this is what I've learned over the years. First things first is to remember we're all humans. And
Mm,
actually, humans are not powered with a constant, uninterrupted source of energy. So, by learning that and by having a better understanding in terms of our own self-awareness, we get better attuned to our energy levels. So I
right.
think looking at this in a slightly different way, reframing that and understanding that in order to leverage our energy, we've got to be able to put in to take out.
Mm,
So to keep energy high in order to stay consistent, keep our
Right.
mindset consistent, keep our behaviors and skills consistent, and the way that we operate and show up.
Hmm.
It really is, what I've learned, it's really all about how we fuel our energy.
Right.
Um,
And
I
if
think
I can kind of follow up to that, because putting in energy is also a ritual, it's a habit, right? So what kind of routines have been non-negotiables in that aspect?
it's for sure evolved over time. I really put that emphasis on time is a real precious learner. It gives me that, it gives us that insight into ourselves. It allows us to really think about how we operate at our best. Um, Rituals, therefore, have evolved with that as our lifestyles change, as different cadence of life comes into effect.
Mm-hmm.
What's most important is finding a balance and knowing that what works maybe right now may not work in 3 months from now, or may not work in 3 weeks from now.
Hmm.
So, really being able to plan for that,
Right.
knowing what's needed, knowing what resources are needed, knowing what people I need to be able to count on to be able to create that balance, that's really important. And I guess I've always been a planner, and
Right.
that gives me the confidence to be able to create that balance and thus that consistency.
Right. And if I can ask for a little bit of a specific example, because you mentioned you're a planner, but is there one specific routine that's working for you in this time?
Right now, I'm probably more in tune with my own kind of energy levels than I've been for a long time.
Mhm.
Um, and I know that when I have my time to really put in some good quality work on some research for a piece of training delivery I might be doing, or for a workshop or a particular coaching engagement, I
Hmm.
really give time to go deep into that topic.
Right.
Um, for me to have the luxury of being able to have that flow state where the topic that you're focused on becomes so interesting that it feels effortless and time just flows by. That's
Mm.
kind of an ideal description, but I aim to carve out enough time for myself to get into that state so that when the topic arises that I've planned for, it can be
Mm.
something that we can then go deep into or we can navigate through. So
Right.
it's about carving out time to be able to focus on the things that are really important to upcoming conversations,
Mm.
and that most importantly, it is that strategic pause, it's that thinking time that
Mm.
creates that clarity and builds, I guess it becomes cumulative,
Yeah.
and it allows us to build sharper and sharper thinking.
Right. And I'm also hearing like a common thread of intentionality in general across the practices that you mentioned. So thank you for sharing that. And I also want to ask you, because what I hear is a very evolved aspect of approaching, what your next task is, what your next project is. But have there also been moments where you might have faced resistance and you wanted to kind of stay here, but the resistance kind of keeps pulling you back, probably from your earlier days with the sporting goods company or Nike or, anything else that you might want to talk about?
Yeah, it's a good one, isn't it? Because I think we have levels of resistance in all that we do, kind of somehow brings us back to a level of, I guess, just a reference to science, and we need that resistance to
Yeah.
create that healthy push-pull.
Yeah.
Um, we also need the grit that creates resistance. I'm a big believer that you can't make really great progress without a healthy and productive level of grit. It
Yeah.
allows for traction. It
Yeah.
allows us, if it's something that's, relating to interactions, a team, the way individuals are communicating, there
Yeah.
needs to be a certain amount, a healthy combination of grit to
Mhm.
be able to really find those gems, the cliche is going to be the pearl in the oyster, but it really does work like that. So there's been plenty of times when there's been resistance.
Mhm.
Um, and, I find that to be a really great topic that I'm coaching leaders with at the moment. Um, a few conversations over the past few days put me in mind of that, the kind of resistance that would come from really difficult conversations.
Mm.
Whereas I think if we understand and know that resistance is not all bad,
Mm.
it can be a signal that, there's a lack of understanding. There could be a different way to frame the situation.
Yeah.
It's about ensuring that, there's full and clear communication.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess I've had a lot of experiences of having resistance. I've learnt much along the way. And
Mm.
now I do my best to be able to frame it in such a way that ultimately it will drive a level of progress. But that's up to me how I steer it in the
Mm.
way that I bring questions in my thinking and how I approach different
Yeah.
perspectives to see things also always from the perspective of others.
Right. And I think that's a completely I think it's a very deep topic of org psychology and individual psychology that you've also briefly tapped into, because then that guides your approaches and how effective your interventions can be. But I would also kind of like to understand a little bit about competing pressures. So, you have a talk, you have an intervention, you have a coaching, and sometimes they can happen at the same time or they can happen in the same week, and that creates a lot of pressure, right, from a timing perspective, because as I understood from you, you'd like to carve it out, but let's
Mhm.
let's assume that there is a moment where all these three things collide. So how do you maintain focus, like tangibly, as a person and a professional?
Yeah, again, it is. And that happens. That's kind of for real right now. It's multiple different priorities that are all very different,
Yeah.
uh, that all need a level of prioritization and a level of planning for. Um, Again, it comes back down to planning that right time, but it's also planning that mindset as well. So, it's a wonderful treat to have planning time in front of me. If I don't have that right mindset to get the most out of that time,
Mhm.
then those competing priorities may be pulling for my mindset and I may be distracted to other topics. So, I think what's super important and what I've proved to myself is being able to have, I'm coming to the word that you've shared at the top of this session, which is discipline.
Mm.
And discipline's an interesting one because it's sort of it's this accountability level that we need to have to ourselves to do what we say we'll do, to keep our promises. And
Mm.
they're even the smallest promises to ourselves. If it's a planning task, to make sure something doesn't just get done, but gets done well, so that
Mm.
we're set up to get the most out of the time invested,
Right.
then I guess that's an aspect of discipline that is relevant to how that we lead ourselves, particularly when there's multiple priorities and we work in this fluid way that we do.
Right. So honoring your word to yourself is what I'm also hearing from there. But I also want to kind of lead to the final question that I have for you is around, women who are stepping into new places, making transitions, or moving from corporate to entrepreneurial ventures, or the other way around. There is a lot of a resistance because it's not like somebody's laying out the path for you for that transition. And what also often tends to happen is that there is overcrowding of information and access to information out there. So people do tend to feel a bit lost. And I think the pursuit of new direction also becomes a little bit tough because you're holding yourself accountable or you're trying, but at the same time the payoff is not immediate, right? It's coming in delayed,
Yeah.
it takes a lot of perseverance, and I think a lot of effort kind of crashes in those moments. So what's the single best piece of advice you'd give to someone who's making either a transition or trying to cultivate self-discipline?
It's recognizing the value, pardon me, excuse me, of thinking time.
Mm.
In those early days when everything is a priority,
Mm.
if the priority isn't yourself,
Mm.
to fuel yourself, to give time to really thinking about what's coming next, how are you preparing for that key conversation,
Mm.
that is a discipline that is a reward to self. And when, as I've said, everything is a super important priority and lots of things are moving fast,
Mm.
there really isn't time to sit and think and reflect
Mm.
and consider. You're having to do that in the moment.
Mm.
So, where I'm going with this is that there is huge benefit in slowing down to speed up.
Right.
And, in our if it is the example you give of moving into a more entrepreneurial setup, then the expectation there is that everything has to happen at pace.
Mm,
But the only way that can happen with pace and with good momentum is that we slow down to speed up and we
right.
make really good and informed decisions because we have that clarity of mind and we've really been able to have that time to think about things in order to go faster. So I also run some coaching sessions around this because to me it's about having considered speed. So it's
Mm,
moving with considered speed because you've done your homework and you've afforded yourself the time
yeah,
to take a beat, pause, reflect, and then
right.
that becomes, really good common practice that you're doing on a regular basis.
Fair enough. And in your journey when you were starting out, for example, did you also have accountability partners or have you been your own all throughout?
We've always, I guess that question is an interesting one because it's a great practice. We
Mm,
love to, from a training perspective, a coaching perspective, create these marriages of accountability
mm,
because it allows us to do what we say we'll do, hold ourselves to account, and keep ourselves honest. I think one of the things for me that I need to do more of is probably seek more of that accountability check-in.
mm,
I spend a lot of time mentoring and having those conversations. And now I find myself looking for reverse mentoring opportunities to pull that sort of self-accountability in, that I'm doing the things that I said I'd do for me.
mm.
Um, I've also taken the opportunity to work with a business coach. That's a level of accountability. And I guess coming back to my own knowledge of what I've held myself to account for over being disciplined to do what I say that I will do, having the planning and thought around it. But yeah, it's super important to do it, but sometimes life can just take over.
Right. But also, I feel that through the conversation and how you ended it, also, you're an example of somebody who leads by example, right? Because you mentioned learning is never complete and mastery is an ongoing process. And I think now you're coming back to reverse mentoring. So I love that we completed a loop there, despite the fact that you've already spent enough time to call yourself a master. So thank you. Thank you for sharing your journey and insights with us today. This was inspiring for me, and I'm sure it's going to be also inspiring for the listeners. Before we end, though, is there any message that you'd specifically like to give out, Vicky?
It is one of the things to close that loop once again is remember we're humans. There's so many ways that we drive ourselves to be exponential. We have
Mm,
great ideas. We can amplify those amazing ideas by technology, but always remember we are humans, and so therefore lead like a human and really think about what is your true human leadership that you can bring to the fore at all times.
amazing. Thank you so much, Vicky. Thank you for being here with us today. And thanks everyone to tuning into BareLead. If you love this conversation, you can follow, subscribe, or leave us a review on Spotify and Apple Music. I'm Pooja, and I'll see you next time for more stripped down conversations. Until then, keep it real.